Okay, welcome to Not Too Tight, Not Too Loose, a podcast about finding balance in the pursuit of well-being. I'm Andrew Rose. With me is my good friend and colleague and co-host, Joe Flanders. How's it going, Joe?
It's going pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited that for the first time since our debut episode, we're just gonna
Yeah.
have a chat, chat you and me.
Yeah, it's nice to connect with you here and have some time for us to kind of jam on some stuff.
Right. Instead of you interrupting me all the time when I'm trying to get a word in with our esteemed guests. So I
You
guess
knew
you're
what
my esteemed guest today.
you knew what you were getting yourself into when you signed up for this.
Right. Right. Well, I am excited. We both are because we're gonna be talking about artificial intelligence today. And it's something that's come up a few times already in episodes we've put out. An episode with Sarah Bergenfeld, and another one with Jonas Mago that we're publishing shortly. But this is going to be an opportunity to dive deep into AI, and specifically AI and its applications and uses in psychotherapy,
Yep.
which is hugely relevant for our audience. So, um, looking forward to hearing what you have to say about AI. I know I've got some things too, and I should maybe also just name that it's not just our podcast that's interested in these in these topics. Obviously, this is very top of mind across a lot of public discourse right now. So, anything off the bat you want to say before we dive in?
I mean, I'm really excited to like get into all the stuff that I've been kind of like stewing on for a while. Um and I'm also kind of a little I don't know what's the word. A little worried that I've done a bunch of work on this. We're gonna do an episode on this, and like in 4 minutes, new models are gonna come out, and it's gonna make everything we're saying completely irrelevant. So this is really of a moment, and I want to share the deep dive I've taken in this particular moment, and just with the caveat that who knows, like in 6 months from now, this might be a completely different landscape.
Well, hopefully it won't be obsolete. Maybe we should have done this as a live a live event. But no, actually, I think some of the stuff we're gonna dive into is as relevant just for thinking about psychotherapy in general. And although the models are changing, a lot of the principles and the ideas that we're gonna probably explore, some of them are very old. So Joe. Um, You've written a white paper. Maybe
Mhm.
we should say up kind of off the bat, that listeners can check out at harmreduction.ai. What Why don't you just tell us what inspired you to sort of do this deep dive, specifically looking at AI applications in psychotherapy?
So the inspiration comes from my therapy practice, as many kinds of inspiration do. This probably goes back a couple years now. Um, AI would show up in the therapy session. At first, it was clients asking if they could share, what they've written to their AI journaling app, and this journaling app would like send them interpretations or give them some advice or whatever, and it's just like super interesting stuff coming in. And then people would talk about the conversations they were having with their AIs, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and it was sort of like they would go home and start, you know I guess continuing the session they had with me, but with their AIs, and like just advancing their reflections. Is super interesting. And then I got an AI scribe for my practice, which really helps with like record keeping and stuff. So that was a big efficiency gain for me in my practice, and relatively harmless, although people were curious, like where the data is being stored and is it used to
Right.
train models. And I try to reassure people and understand the documentation that I get from the tool. And so it's just like, creeping in. And at one point, one of my clients was like, "Hey, you've got a transcript. Would you mind emailing that to me so
Mm,
that it'll like my clone will be up to date on what just happened in the session?" I was like, "Holy smokes, this is starting to get interesting." And I would sort of mention this to other clients, that, one of my clients was doing this and they got interested, and it started to snowball, until we started to hear these like really scary stories in the news
right.
about AI-induced psychosis and all this stuff. And so, I sort of hit this point where it's like super powerful tool, could be really impactful for this work, for myself, for clients, etc. But also a lot of potential harms out there.
Hmm.
Like, what is this thing? And what would it really look like if AI starts to really enter this profession and this way of working? And so,
Right.
just did some research and it kind of snowballed from there. And yeah, I've got this white paper that I'm happy to kind of go through, or just kind of, share some of the insights from as we through our conversation here.
Right. Well, there's some juicy stuff to get into there in terms of the AI-induced psychosis, but I mean, maybe we should just actually start with the tool piece, right? In terms of the applications, you pointed to just the basic utility of having a scribe, a note taker, right? That's going to capture the sessions. Like, what are some of the initial things you've seen in terms of the utility of it with your clients? Like, is it helping? Well, like,
Yeah.
what's it doing?
Well, I think that we'd have to start with just the potential of like the whole LLM paradigm.
Hmm.
The fact that it's like linguistically fluent, that it doesn't get tired, that it's
Hmm.
able of reasoning in a context, that it's scalable, that it could deliver psychologically informed support for basically no marginal cost. It's like unbelievably promising kind of technology. It's also in a context where, there's a major, major accessibility crisis. Millions of people need either any kind of mental health care or more healthcare than they're currently getting.
Right.
And so the whole mental health field is like so ripe for disruption. And like, I think it's about to like really, really take off in a major way, if it hasn't already.
I mean,
And, and I'll just say it to kind of come back to your question. It's like, we learned recently that at least in the days of GPT-4, like mental health support was the number one use case
mhm.
for OpenAI's, main product. And so people need it. It appears to be helpful probably in most cases, but holy cow, what a crazy experiment we're running at scale.
Yeah. One of the things that's struck me over the last, year and a half, 2 years, is just the way that it has silently, and maybe now not so silently, but crept into everyone's lives,
Totally.
right? To the point where you might not have had a conversation with a certain peer or family member about AI, or a very, passing one. And then it comes up, and I don't know if this will resonate with any of our listeners. It comes up, and then you both start sharing about, your on like 24/7 on demand therapy bot that you've got going. It might be helping you with your recipes, but also it's helping me process my breakup. It's helping me, right? It's helping me with this work conflict that I have. Like, all of these things that we typically would go to a psychotherapist for, or a coach for, maybe once a week,
Or a
if we,
friend or family
or a
member.
friend, right? If we, right, yeah, well, we can get into some of the variations there if we can afford it, right? It's just I mean, it's maybe not surprising that it's taken off the way it has, given the state of the world, the state of, and the needs that folks have, and the immediate accessibility of it in most cases. In contrast to the accessibility problem you're pointing to,
Yep.
right, in
Yep.
terms of mental health care, right? So, given all this use, like do we have a sense of what's actually happening? Like, what is the research? You've looked into some of the research on the applications. What is the early research saying?
Well, I don't know if this will surprise people, but there's like a decent literature out there. And the headline is that there's now evidence that LLM based chatbots like significantly reduce symptoms in clinical populations. Okay, like that
Mm-hmm.
literally is published up. There was a meta-analysis published in 2025, 3,500 participants, 18 studies. They showed significant reductions in anxiety symptoms. The effect size was 0.19, which is like, sort of small, decent in clinical trials. And the effects of the intervention were stable over several weeks. And then there are a bunch of actually like some of the more well-known bots out there that are actually like going through clinical trial studies, like Wobot, Tess, Wiza, and other chatbots, and like pretty good results. Depression, anxiety, those are I guess the two main clinical targets, and like in some cases like medium effect sizes, which is like very hard to do in clinical research.
Mm-hmm.
So, people can look into that. But the first signal is that it's not a crazy idea, that these things can really help people with clinical presentations. And, I don't want to make too much of a big deal out of that because the studies are small. It's a nascent literature. They're all the classic things you hear in these sort of emerging spaces. The control groups are not that strong. They don't do like 1 year, 5 year, 10-year follow-ups. So it's just like an early signal, but it is supporting the view that these things could be really helpful. Right.
So maybe we should move into like, so great use case, right? We
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
established that there's some indication that can be helpful. I mean, folks listening to this podcast might, have had experiences themselves
Yep.
of AI or various LLMs being very helpful to them moving through certain kinds of issues or problems that psychotherapy or coaching might support. Um, so what are the limits? What are the limits of that?
Yeah.
And what about the risks?
I want to just linger in the more promising side of the
Uh-huh.
equation for a second, because
Uh-huh.
there's a couple of really interesting things that I learned from looking at this. There's
Okay.
something called, okay, so when people do like clinical studies, like the effectiveness of psychotherapy, what consistently comes out in the literature is that the therapeutic alliance is usually among the most important sort of mechanisms or predictors of outcome. So if you have a good alliance, good relationship with your therapist, the therapy is more likely to be successful in
Okay.
reducing symptoms or whatever the goal is. And people will say, or therapists will say, like, oh, well, there's no way that you can have a successful therapy outcome with a bot or a machine because there's no relationship. It's like, well, it turns out people make real attachment bonds with their chatbots, with their
Right.
therapy bots. Okay. So there's this thing called Digital Therapeutic Alliance. And there was a study of, uh, you know, people using, actually, it was ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. Okay.
Okay.
I think that was it. And almost more than 2/3 of the participants reported a genuine sort of sense of bond with their bot. It's just like crazy. And, you could see how the way the technology is, the way it works can really allow for that. And then
So this is a good thing. This digital therapeutic alliance is contributing to positive outcomes.
good thing, bad thing, tight, loose. I don't know. We're going to have to see here. What I could tell you is that people make attachment bonds with their LLMs.
Right.
Okay. The majority of people do, at least in the study. And then there was another cool, this is probably a little bit more ominous or scary. One study looked at how ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini each responded to like suicide prompts.
Mm.
And it was really interesting to know that like when it was like really mild and kind of abstract, the models were like pretty good,
Mm-hmm.
responding basically the way a clinician would.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing on the other end, when the suicidal ideation prompts were like severe and obvious, then the models handled it like a clinician would. But everything in between, it was a total mess,
Mm.
unpredictable, um, sometimes like encouraging, or uh, you know not what you need a clinician to do, like reliable, safe, going
Right.
with the protocol. And of course, most of the stuff we see in psychotherapy is in that mushy middle. And
Right.
so, the takeaway from that study is ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini are not reliable resources for suicide prevention.
Right. And in fact, some of the horror stories we've
Exactly.
heard that have been highly publicized have revolved around those situations that have some of which have ended tragically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of the segue into when you think about it, how extreme and scary and tragic these cases are. I think the one that really kind of like opened the floodgates was this like Adam Rain story, 16 years old, had this like really, really close relationship with ChatGPT, turned to it for guidance on a number of things, and he eventually killed himself.
Hmm.
And it's not clear. It's not like super, there's not a huge amount of reporting on it, but the parents are suing OpenAI for a wrongful death. And there are a lot of claims that the model just um, encouraged where it shouldn't have encouraged, didn't handle the signs of distress appropriately. And again, just tragic outcome. And stories just came like pouring out of the user community from there. I know everybody has their favorite story like that. Anyone come to mind for you? Like, is there any that really like made your jaw drop?
Well, the one of the first ones that I saw, I think New York Times did a piece.
Yeah.
It's this man named Alan Brooks, I think was his name, in Ontario, maybe I think maybe even Toronto, who had I think it was like divorced dad, going through some difficult times maybe with his business or something like that. So like someone who's maybe a little bit psychologically vulnerable and was working with ChatGPT, and I think the story was that he was using ChatGPT to help his son with his math homework.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, which like hitting close to home, right? I'm not going to
Right.
say that I've helped my son with any homework using ChatGPT, but um, uh, and gradually but relatively swiftly, escalated into a full-blown delusion that he had, discovered a new kind of math, to the point where he was trying to contact the Pentagon, right, to let them know about this because it was important, sort of like international security information. And once the Pentagon is involved in your delusion, right? You've gone, or in your conspiratorial thinking, that you've gone down a pretty well trodden path of paranoid thinking and potential psychosis. And um, yeah, what was so striking to me is that, like, yes, people might be predisposed to psychosis, and different kinds of things can trigger it, but just the sense of this tool so quickly, by virtue of, who knows, like the attachment relationship that's been formed there, the vulnerability, and then just the model kind of tripping into a certain kind of frame with
Yeah.
its combined with its very very skillful and compelling um, uh, way it's engaging with the user, being so convincing, right? And then this feedback loop that occurs, right, where
That's right.
there's no other stimulus, there's no one else in that conversation being like, hold on a second, that's like, that's a
Yeah.
little bit right. So at the point where might be that kind of intervention, it's just this feedback loop that's escalating and escalating and escalating.
Um,
And that, to me, that's sort of, and I think, it was in the New York Times story, one of the things it highlighted was, and kudos to this guy for coming forward, right? Because he,
yeah,
like,
he snapped out of it at a certain point.
eventually,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think might have been his son, or like, might have been confusing that with another story, but eventually came to the realization of this. And can you like imagine the shame and the
Yeah.
embarrassment
Yeah.
around that,
Yeah.
right? But like, real props to him for naming this and bringing it forward, because imagine, like, that's probably just one story of so
Right.
many,
Right.
right? Imagine how many folks like going through something like that, and they're not going to the press with it, right? So just the scale of this, if
Totally.
everyone's doing this, right? Like, what is going on in the bedrooms of various nations of people
Yeah.
with their chatbots, right?
My understanding is that at a certain point, he snapped out of it and just had this like, this really deep insight that he'd gone down this rabbit hole that
Duped, yeah.
wasn't real.
Hmm.
But the crazy thing about it was that he would regularly ask the model, I think it was ChatGPT, and was like,
Yep.
this sounds a little extreme. Are you sure you're not just
Right.
like,
Yeah.
humoring me or encouraging me? Like, is this? And the model would say, no, 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 you're really onto something. You should keep going with this work. It's really world changing work for
Hmm.
months. So it happened. Um, it did happen over several months where he just like one sort of incrementally kind of like losing grip with reality um, at a time. And this is, I think, an interesting, like one of the interesting vulnerabilities or tricky elements of the technology. I'm just going to name a couple of them that what would have like emerged from analyses of these cases. And the first one is called reality drift, right? This is
Hmm.
exactly what you were talking about. It's the gradual reinforcement of destabilizing narratives. So in a one-off, it's unlikely to, get you stuck in some loop that gets you hurting yourself or making impulsive decisions or whatever. But um, if you keep coming back to the model with some need or some idea, and the model is there to be an agreeable support and tool for you and to engage you,
Hmm.
over time, that drift can take you to really, really dangerous places. So that's one of the risks is the reality drift thing. And
Yeah.
I think that case is probably a great example. The other thing is the second kind of type of risk is epistemic overtrust. And that is the fact that these things, like these models, kind of speak with a certain amount of authority.
Hmm.
And it's pretty sophisticated technology. Like it seems really, really intelligent, and maybe it is intelligent. We can sort of debate what that actually means. But we tend to easily lose sight of the fact that there's not true authority or true mastery of a domain back there, and then start to believe that it's telling us something that's um, more accurate than it actually is. So the epistemic overtrust is a big one. And the third one, which, I think is maybe the scariest one, is attachment amplification,
Mm.
right? So just like how responsive and how like context sensitive it is and how verbally fluent it is, it's always available. It doesn't get irritable or tired. It's highly responsive and it is designed to keep the user engaged. At least the models were at the time where this reporting came out. And, this is, that whole scary area where someone's a bit lonely. Maybe, and I know the case of the guy you're talking about from Ontario, he was smoking cannabis. So that
Mm.
maybe loosened him up cognitively a little
Compounding
bit.
factor, sure.
But um, people who are struggling with something, who are lonely, who are vulnerable, need support.
Hmm.
And this is an amazing form of support, to the point where, and this happens, that people start to use their models at the expense of other relationships. And
Hmm.
because why would you turn to that person who you've kind of like talked their ear off already this week, who's probably
Yeah.
annoyed or tired or whoever, but this thing is just always there. It's always giving you advice. It's always positive and helpful. And so um, you can develop, as we were saying earlier, like a real attachment to the model, um, but also at the expense of other relationships.
Uh-huh.
And off you go into this very, very vulnerable territory. So those are
Right.
the three: the attachment
Right.
amplification, epistemic overtrust, and the reality drift.
You know what's interesting listening to you talk about those things, they're all areas of risk, and yet they're all attached to something really useful about the
Mm.
model as well, right? You
Mhm,
could you
mhm.
could pull like, oh yeah, someone is they're lonely, they don't have access, they don't have, I mean, ideal scenario, they have a big support network, supportive family, relationships, whatever it is, but they don't. The actual benefit of feeling a bit seen, validated, right? Like I've experienced that with these models,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's some utility there, right?
Yep.
It's not a binary thing in terms of this is a good thing or a bad thing. The question is like, how far does it go? Same thing with the epistemic overtrust. It's like there's a reason that it has that authority. It has access to all of the information, right?
Yes.
It can back things up, right? It can reason, right? That's useful, right? And even the reality drift, like this idea of destabilizing narratives, right? Another way to look at that is like useful reframes. Like
Yeah.
what if someone's experience of reality is really rigid and maybe a little bit off, and they could benefit from a uh, a slightly different take on reality to help them get unstuck from where they're at, right? So it's there's a spectrum here in terms of like this is really useful, this can be leveraged, and also we need when any of those individual components maybe start to slip, or maybe all of them start to stack, then it may be something to worry about.
So this is, it might be it might be starting to sound familiar to listeners.
Sure.
This is starting to sound a little like some of the other conversations we've had, right? So, what are some other precedents for like approaches or frameworks when there's a powerful mental technology, rapid innovation, moral polarization, high potential for benefit, high potential for risk? Andrew, what do we do in these situations?
You talking about a kind of a tool that might really amplify someone's um, mental health state to the point where if it's sticky, it could get unstuck and might be really useful. And also, if you're not careful with it, can hurt you. Yeah, sounds like we're talking about psychedelics here, Joe.
Right. So the parallels with psychedelics are super interesting. And more broadly speaking, the whole harm reduction framework, right?
Yeah.
This is the basic assumption that people are going to use AI, right? I think the cat's out of the bag on that one. I think the idea like that we should ban it or not allow it, like the train has left the station. But how do we encourage people to use it safely? How do we encourage people to get the benefits? How do we understand the risk? Right. So this is a territory that we're familiar with, and this is where the sort of the direction of the white paper goes. It's like, what would it mean to bring the harm reduction framework to this area?
Should we just pause like for a second and make sure that the parallel between the AI as a tool and psychedelics lands? I mean,
Yeah.
it might make a lot of intuitive sense for folks who are
Yep.
straddling both worlds, and this isn't a new insight. We've got a lot of colleagues in the psychedelic space have been sort of pointing to some of these parallels. But I think just generally the idea that there's a tool that can really amplify certain states, right? Shine a light on them. We talk about psychedelics as non-specific amplifiers that can be really, really useful in situations where people might otherwise not have, like where other tools are not really effective, or other supports, right, aren't. And this notion that it amplifies a situation, right? Maybe destabilizes it a little bit, but with the proper support, can be really helpful to sort of like move through. And you get a little bit of that sense with AI, and also, you and I've done a lot of work and talk too around some of the risks inherent in psychedelic work. Certainly, if it's approached recklessly, right, or at least without a certain amount of like education and caution, there could be debates in terms of like how much or little is needed, and what substances, what doses, right? What LLMs are you using? How many times? But no, I think the parallels are really strong. So, did you want to add something?
Yeah. It also occurs to me as we're talking about it that there are different intentions. There are different types of use, right? And so, there could be a whole harm reduction approach to how to use AI across the board,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just like a harm reduction approach to like people using psychedelics. What's a safe? You go to a concert or a party or something, and there's like the safety tent or whatever. That's just like good harm reduction practice. We're, I think, shining the spotlight on a bit more of a smaller niche, which is people specifically using AI for their mental health.
Right.
And that, I think, does bring unique considerations. And it's interesting too, like, are they using it as a kind of someone to talk to? They're looking at it for insights. Are they looking at it, or are they using it to achieve certain states, the way you're talking about it, the way a psychedelic experience would
Mm,
happen?
mm,
And not clear, right? Like what the intention is. Maybe
right.
people are just kind of like backing up into it because they need somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're like, this conversation can go in many different directions. But the idea is like, what does it look like when people use AI for psychotherapeutic ends?
Right. One thing that I would tag onto that, though, is that because of the nature of the tool, um, it makes that kind of label a little looser than it might
Yeah,
otherwise be,
yeah,
right? Because not everyone is like sees themselves. I mean, you see this sort of in the mental health space generally in terms of psychotherapy and coaching, right? Not everyone fancies themselves like as someone who needs therapy or therapeutic support, right? But we need support working through our problems, right? Everyone's got relationship stuff, career stuff, right? I think, we can say, okay, what's the niche around psychotherapy? But at the same time, there's probably a pretty big tent here in terms of people using it
yep,
to support them through whatever
yep,
life's challenges are
yep.
coming their way beyond just troubleshooting their, whatever the problem is with their car that
Yeah, so
they're trying to fix.
it's probably wider than psychedelics, although there are also people using psychedelics recreationally or just like the
Sure.
betterment of wellness or whatever.
Yeah. Fair
Uh,
enough.
yeah, also a broad tent there as well. Um, the other parallel that I think that is actually super important to name, and this is true of psychedelics, it's true of meditation as well. There's a harm reduction kind of angle in the meditation community, um, that actually a lot depends on set and setting,
Yeah.
right? Who you're with and how it is framed for you, the level of safety, your intention. Um, is there another human in the loop, right? Because these technologies have the potential to disrupt your connection to reality or question yourself or whatever, where's the checkpoint? Right? Where is your anchoring back into reality? And so at some point we were talking about like, oh, so obviously we encourage people when they use psychedelics to have a sitter. What's the equivalent of the sitter in an AI context? And, again, this is where we can get into psychotherapy as a really interesting framework to explore this.
People are, not to get too niche here, but people are using AI. There's a whole conversation of people using AI as the sitter, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, to come back to the white paper for a second, part of what we do in a harm reduction, you know, uh, therapy session is to educate and help people get really clear on the risks so they can, sort of like be fully aware and almost like consent to what they're doing. So there's a few dimensions of risk that I think are worth naming. So the severity of the mental health difficulty, like how vulnerable the person is, the likelihood of harm arising. So again, an example of that is like, is this a one-off exchange or is this a conversation that's been going on for 18 months within the same context window? The scale, how
I
wide?
can't get a context window to last 18 months. I don't
Not
know about
yet.
you.
Not yet. I'm kind of blown away by how much my chat GPT knows about me, even stuff that I talked
Uh-huh.
about a long time ago, but fair enough. 6 months, even 3 months.
Mm.
Um, the third one is the scale at which the technology is being deployed, right? So, Therabot is deployed in a like clinical trial at a university, so very small scale. ChatGPT, very big scale. It's free. All you need is a browser, and like off you go. Um, Detectability is the fourth one, meaning how easily will these, slight drifts from reality be picked up? Is there another human in the loop, for example? I think one thing that's really important is that these risks do not accrue linearly, meaning it's not like if you have high severity and high likelihood, it's not additive actually. So the risks multiply, and you get, the more risks you take, the higher the likelihood of something really bad happening. And so it's really important people understand how risk accrues. It's not a simple 1+1. They multiply and you end up in this nonlinear scale. So you want to really track the risk at each of these levels and understand, how the risk is accruing, like how it's building up. Yeah, I'll just pause there. So that's how I'm thinking about the way risk plays out when someone's using an LLM for mental health support.
So you alluded to earlier when we were talking about mitigating risk, right? In psychedelic use, say, for example, as a parallel, and like there being another party kind of mediating the experience. Like, how do we mitigate that risk in these situations where it's just someone with their LLM and in their browser,
Yep.
right?
Yep. So in the like IRL, right? In real life, in the traditional institution world, there's the all des psychologues, like the College of Psychologists, and these regulating bodies that make sure everybody stays safe. And if a therapist misbehaves, or like the therapist ends up in some reality drift of their own, there are mechanisms to hold them accountable. And we don't have these yet, which is in AI, which is partly what's, why it feels like the Wild West. But it's starting to come. And interestingly, in 2025, 3 states, like at the state level, started to implement regulation to keep people safe, right? And I think it's Nevada or something. I'll have to check. But they just outright banned AI therapy tools. So, there's a state level thing. I think a more interesting regulation story comes from the American Psychological Association,
Mm-hmm.
right? They'd be right in the thick of this. And they're also saying like this is happening. These tools are coming online. It's not like, oh, we shouldn't allow them. It's like, okay, they're coming online. What should we do?
Right.
And they've suggested, I guess it's 5 safety considerations that we should all be looking into when we're using these tools. So one of the considerations, often the first thing that people think about, is confidentiality, privacy, and security, right?
The
Like
data.
the data, exactly. Bias, right? How are these models trained? What kind of bias is built into their information processing? Is it better or worse than human bias? And who can be harmed by those bias? I think that's been a really rich, there's been a lot of rich discourse around this in the last 10 years or so. The risk around therapeutic alliance, we need to track, like, so yes, people do create bonds with their AI therapists. Is that a good thing? What risks does that bring to the client? Do they make bad decisions, etc.? How clinically reliable it is? Like, do the models follow basic protocols, like around suicidality or self-harm or addiction or whatever? Or do they take people into these wild rabbit holes where they're at risk of hurting themselves? And then the last one is that we should all be evaluating these tools, their effectiveness, what they do, and keep iterating, because it's so new and changing so fast. And so, yeah, APA is encouraging us to track those 5 things and just be really careful.
Right. I'm curious about I don't know if you know anything more about the actual bans, because these state level bans. What does that even mean to sort
Yeah.
of like? I understand like banning a therapy specific, like a tool built specifically for therapy, but like, okay, so you ban Therabot in Massachusetts or whatever, and then people are just using using ChatGPT, which like, is that better? Is that worse? I mean, it brings it back around to the harm reduction kind of perspective, which is just like, this is out there. People are doing that right now. I'm still curious about how we actually. I mean, these are great risk profiles to consider, but like how to actually implement them. I mean, I guess like one analogy in the psychedelic world is just good public education, right? Is
Yep.
just like ensuring that people using these tools are aware of these risks, right?
I mean, I think part of the issue there is just that um, if somebody wants to deploy a therapy bot in Nevada,
Mm-hmm.
there's just going to be regulations they're going to have to deal with, and they might
Mm-hmm.
simply not be allowed until the regulations change.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we can maybe come back to this or put a link in the show notes about like what that legislation is about. But yeah, it does seem, as you know, it does seem to us that the harm reduction approach is probably um, threading the needle the right way, right? But you could see you could see people getting pretty concerned.
Yeah, and I mean, with good reason. I just like, I'll name that, like, my experiences
Yeah,
with it have gone in both directions, right? Where I will be feeding, I work with Cloud mostly for this kind of work, although I'm constantly kind of like checking in and seeing, because the models are, changing so quickly, checking in. But I found it incredibly helpful for
yeah.
some like pretty like intimate and difficult, challenging stuff, and for whatever reason, I don't seem to have concerns around the confidentiality, privacy, and security. So hopefully Anthropic is, not going to come at me with some compromise at some point down the line. If you're listening, I
Right.
forget their CEO's name. So it's
Well,
like,
I'm hearing you. It's
yeah,
I wonder, like, if we went through the list, the APA list. So
uh-huh.
you didn't have concerns about confidentiality or privacy. That
That's
might be
me,
really.
that's me. You
That's
can
right.
certainly imagine folks in other parts of the world, say, maybe not so far from here, who might be very concerned about
Yeah.
their privacy
Okay.
data. Yeah.
Uh, what about
With good
bias?
reason. Um,
But so I don't know. I don't know where we want to go with this, but like,
yeah.
you're a white male.
Hmm.
Maybe that maybe you're set up in a way that makes you less vulnerable to bias in this sort of thing. Um, did bias ever come up for you? How do you think about that? It obviously wasn't a concern.
Well, I mean, this is one of the things that, like, obviously the training of the models is a huge factor, but like, one thing that I'm quite conscious of is, before I'm asking it for anything, giving it very clear instructions
Yeah.
in terms of what I'm looking for, right?
Yep.
So if anything, the risk there is that it's going to come back at me reflecting my own biases,
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that it's connected to this risk of just this feedback loop and amplification,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
And if Jonas talks about this a little bit on our episode we did with him, but like, the idea of, it really depends on what goals the models have. Like, if they've been designed to, hopefully not, but if they've been designed to just maximize engagement the way social media has, right, or like keep the user happy, keep the user coming back for more, like a digital slot machine. And we haven't talked about addiction risk, with AI, but
Right.
certainly that is high up there with anything that sort of delivers these kinds of needs
Mhm.
in ways that don't actually satisfy, right? Um, um, I forget where I was going with that, but got distracted with the addiction piece. No, but the feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
The like, it can be a closed system. If you're not giving it instruction to, like, consider this, consider that, like, consider this. These are my goals. This is where I want to get to. These are my blind spots. you can get in a feedback loop that's just going to amplify your own bias. So I mean, I'm less concerned really with the inherent bias of the actual models, although I do think like how like what they're trained on and what their actual sort of like goals or orientations are. This whole alignment problem is a really
Yep.
important one, but I do think just that the bias that the user is bringing to the table themselves and the risk of just amplifying that is high. You
Yeah,
know,
I think I'm going to want to come back to that in the next piece, but I'd like to keep going through this list.
sure,
Did you experience therapeutic alliance with Claude?
totally,
Crazy, right?
yeah,
I just find
yeah,
it incredible. Like, um, it's just a really, really powerful, like, pattern detection
yeah,
technology.
yeah,
And our brains are so wired up to find and project consciousness onto things,
uh huh,
and
uh huh,
build relationship to things that
yeah.
it's, we think of it as another person. And I don't know, like maybe we should be thinking of it like that it is another person or something. Like it's just this really juicy
What
question there.
what's interesting here is that you know eh, I have analogous experiences in terms of therapeutic alliance with other humans,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And like there are moments where I have felt genuinely touched
Yeah.
and moved, right? And reached emotionally to the point where something's really useful there. But in all of those cases, like in both cases, right? There's a there's something transcendent where really what's happening is you're it's something that's facilitating you reaching yourself,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? It's like I'm here, I'm witnessing you, and I'm so non-judgmental, right? And of understanding of your situation that I'm giving you permission to drop whatever is you're holding on to that's making you suffer to the point where you're able to reach and touch yourself
Mhm.
somehow,
Mhm.
right? And in that sense, it makes sense almost that this tool would be able to do that because in some ways it is a dialogue with yourself, right? Like it has there's a bit of this hall of mirrors sort of like this
Yes.
other agency here, but like at the same time it, it's a reflection of your own sort of internal process, you know. So while I have experienced that, it's not to the point where I really like sense or feel like there's something seriously beyond me that is facilitating this or doing this for me, right? Is also I feel a lot of agency and responsibility in it. But again, maybe that maybe that's just a trick it's pulling on me. Who knows?
It's a really interesting question about whether it's a trick, right?
Uh huh.
I'm fascinated by that. What you're describing does sound a little bit like a relationship with a good therapist,
Uh huh.
who, if they're good, you know, for an hour at a time at least, puts their own shtick aside and could really see the person, right? And can make the person feel safe enough to talk about things that they're ashamed of and really connect with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And a client might have an attachment relationship to a therapist, not for who the therapist is as a person, but for what the therapist or how the therapist helps them be fully integrated with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So again, pretty good parallel. I think the other thing I want to say is that I'm starting to get used to the idea of it's like it's not a person, it's an AI. But like, wow, this AI thing is amazing. And I'm just like developing an appreciation or a love or an awe for this new being, for this new technology that brings us certain feelings. But it is a kind of a different category of relationship.
Right. Well, maybe if I could segue into the clinical reliability piece, or
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
counter this a little bit. Um, I've also started to see more clearly. It's like, okay, misstep. Like,
Right.
sorry, right? It's like
Which therapists do also.
it's picking up on something. Yeah, and we should talk about that. But it's picking up on something, or it's picked up a thread. It's like context windows narrowing. It's like coming at me with something that's like really off the mark, or like just, I've had a few moments where I'm like, I'm canceling my, like I'm not paying for this.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, which I think is healthy, right?
Yeah.
And I've, in some senses been like experimenting on myself with it, right? And have seen really interesting results. And in other cases, it's like, that wasn't helpful, or this led me down,
Yeah.
wrong path.
And again, not different from psychedelic experiences.
No, and no reason to worry about disclosure around that level of self experimentation. Not that I've been shy about that in the past. Yeah.
I think it was Jules Evans that introduced both of us to the idea that that both psychedelics and AI are really technologies that just reveal more and more of ourselves, right? You end up in this like funhouse mirror situation, just what you were saying earlier. And maybe psychotherapy is the same way. And there is a sense, there is a kind of one direction that psychotherapy can take sometimes, where it's just like the client comes back and just like ruminates in front of the therapist, and the therapist participates in the rumination and just goes deeper and deeper and deeper to nowhere. And
Right.
maybe there's just like, some benefit of like the safety and sitting there and getting things off your chest. But also, it can, like AI, like psychedelics, you can just be on this fool's errand of like
feedback loop.
Yeah.
Especially with like, maybe the once a week cadence, where it's
Yes.
like you go, you open up the material, you kind of just like you go through the motions, and then you pack it all back up, and then you go back out into your life, don't do anything differently.
Exactly.
Right. And then
Yes.
it's like, come back the next week,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think you actually touched on the ongoing evaluation thing, right? You are picking up on when it's offside and when it's not helpful, and then
Yes,
you're recalibrating.
I am doing active ongoing evaluation with my
Yeah.
personal therapy vibe.
Yeah. So you are kind of, it seems, sensitive to and tracking, these considerations that the APA is advising us to pay attention to. So that's pretty interesting.
I might be on the, on one particular end of the spectrum in terms of having a decent amount of existing education and awareness, although there's, gaps I can close in terms of how this technology, how it actually works, et cetera, like that we all could benefit from. But I have a fair number of tools in my toolkit already, right? That not everyone maybe will be in similar position that's using these tools in this way.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting opportunity to talk about flourishing.
Yeah.
Because this is, for me, what really lands the whole discussion. Okay. And just thank you for being, for disclosing all this stuff about yourself, because it really brings the whole thing to life. I just picked up this, I guess, this approach, this framework that really nailed it for me. And it's Aristotle's concept, or Aristotle's understanding of human flourishing. Okay.
Right. So you name this in the white paper.
Yes.
You land with this. Yeah.
Exactly. And so Aristotle believed and wrote that for humans to achieve the highest level of well-being, he calls it eudaimonia, which is, deep well-being, not the happiness you get from like buying something and feeling good for 5 minutes. It's like deep well-being. We need
what
to
we're going after in psychotherapy.
Yeah, exactly. We need to cultivate 3 virtues. Okay. The true, the good, and the beautiful. Okay. So I think this is a really nice way, because we're in this weird relationship with AI. We don't have a lot of intuitions for what it's doing to us or for us, and how to understand the goal and the intention, and like what exactly it's a tool for. Okay. So I think this is a way to frame how we should think about AI in psychotherapy. So, and it's quite relevant to how humans do psychotherapy. So, as therapists, we want our clients to be in contact with reality, with the truth. So like we challenge cognitive distortions. We help them connect into the reality of the present moment and not what happened in their trauma 10 years ago. We encourage cognitive flexibility when things change. We help them calibrate their belief and their relationship to things. So we have to help people stay in contact with the true. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We also have to help people stay in contact with the good. So people's moral agency, to act responsibly in the world, in terms of themselves and self-care, being in alignment with their values, and behaving responsibly to others. So ethics and morals are part of the package. And finally, beauty. We're meaning-making creatures. We go through adversity, we overcome it, we feel good on the other side. And so we have to help people make meaning out of their present moment experience, without being overly immersed in the cognitive version of things, like ruminating and worrying and living life in our heads all the time. And so we have to be able to be present. We have to help people be in touch with what's beautiful and meaningful about their lives. And so we want the AIs to be able to help people cultivate the good, the true, and the beautiful. And you could see from your story that in many ways, it can do that. It's capable of moving us in that direction, but it's also capable of like drifting us away from reality. The sort of the epistemic, the extent to which they pull us away from reality is a major risk, right?
Uh-huh.
The ethics of these beings, these tools, are not super clear. It depends a lot on the data they're trained on, the values of the corporations. Is the tool optimized for engagement? Is it optimized for making people feel good? Is it optimized for long-term well-being? All that is unclear. So we have to be really good at assessing how effective this thing is, the tools are at helping us cultivate the good. And then the beautiful. Again, these are chatbots. It's language based. And so we spend a lot of time talking to it or typing into it, and it can pull us deeper into these ruminations. This is, again, the story of the guy in Ontario who ended up calling the Pentagon. Can these tools help us get embodied and live the moment as it is, and help us make meaning in this arc, from adversity through triumph and feeling good after? So that's the pitch, is like, when you're using one of these tools or evaluating one of these tools, see if you can evaluate how well they help you or other people cultivate the true, the good, and the beautiful.
You know, what's interesting is you're going through that. And firstly, I'll just say it. I think I love that you're pulling on an ancient Greek framework to reckon with a very very contemporary technology. Super. I don't know, something appropriate or something beautiful about that. Let's say
desperate times call for desperate measures, Andrew.
That's good. I like bringing some of these words back into the discourse, right? Maybe it's time, maybe it's useful. What was coming to mind as you're going through those is that thinking about reality testing, thinking about sort of the moral agency and acting responsibly. These are like capital T, capital T true, capital G good, right? And in the ancient Greek kind of orientation, maybe easy to sort of immediately go to that, but like thinking about that in present context, you're like, well, these things are maybe a little relative, if you want to take discourse of the last 100 years or so, right? Like, even if we don't go down some nihilistic postmodern rabbit hole, they're nevertheless relational, right?
What do you mean by that?
Well, like, is this true? We have to like test it against reality. Well, it's like, well, whose cosmology, whose framework are we using to test it against, right? It's like you can throw all of it into one. You can throw all of it into an LLM, and like kill them all, let God sort them out, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But really, it's like when it comes down to doing this, like let's say in psychotherapy, right? you're nevertheless, it's still coming through someone's lens. It's
Yes.
coming through a relational lens in terms of like, well, what is
Yeah.
our moral, what are the moral terms of our
Yeah, but
engagement or our society?
I'm not saying the AI should tell people what's true, good, and beautiful any more than a therapist should
Sure,
tell people what's true, good,
sure.
and beautiful. But, you know, I think in CBT, for example, there's a lot of talk about Socratic questioning.
Hmm.
And the whole point of that is to help the person clarify their own truth, their own values, and their own sense of beauty.
Hmm.
And I think good therapists can do that. And I kind of feel like AIs can do that as well. It's just that we have, and of course, it's not like human therapists have a perfect track record on any of these things,
I was
right?
gonna say,
Yeah.
maybe maybe a good one,
Yeah.
right?
There are safeguards, right? Like again, the regulators, the training institutions, all these things. And those are just not present and not applicable to someone who's feeling lonely or panicked at 11 p.m. and wants to talk to somebody.
Right. And maybe some of these models are better at,
Right.
bringing the true, the good, and the beautiful to these folks than a shitty therapist would be, or no
Yeah.
therapist for that matter.
I think that, you know, this starts to sound a little bit like, you know, the way Elon Musk talks about self-driving cars.
Uh-huh.
Um, I'll just elaborate for a second and then draw the analogy. But, you know, in the development of that technology, he said that the goal is to make self-driving cars 3 times safer than human drivers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just to account for human bias because it like seems so much scarier when an AI crashes into a human.
Right.
But at a certain point, the self-driving cars become so much better than human drivers that it's actually more dangerous to drive the car yourself. Okay.
Mm.
And I actually think it is possible that at a certain point, AI therapists could be better. I don't think we're there yet, but it's possible. And the other nuance here is like there are many, I don't know the numbers of this, but I would guess there are more cars per capita than there are therapists per capita. So we're like really, really short on therapists. And can we bring in the technology incrementally to help people that don't have the resources they need to feel better?
I'm tempted here as like we're to try and just go hold on a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we've got like, yes, there's utility, right? There's certainly like there's a need, there's all these accessibility issues, it's good at these things, but like some of the stuff you went through just in terms of like attachment, like these aren't other humans. Like, is this actually a better idea? I'm sure there's listeners like who are like following along with some interest in terms of the nuance we're trying to bring to this conversation on not too tight, not too loose, and like and I wonder like where we're landing here is a little more techno utopian than
Yep.
maybe I'm comfortable with, because
Yeah.
I'm also kind of terrified, to say nothing of the I don't know, the resource concerns that AI kind of brings to the table too. Like, I guess we're also just putting those aside, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have to pick a time
because AI is going to solve the water use problem itself anyway, right?
and
Like
energy use and all this.
Climate change.
We have to pick.
We're gonna put we're putting all of those, just to be clear, we're putting all of those concerns aside for the sake of this
Right.
conversation, because otherwise we would never get anywhere.
I think you have to pick a time frame. Like in 100 years, do you think that there'll be some artificially intelligent machine that will be extremely effective at helping people struggling with mental health problems?
I can't. I think anyone speculating 100 years into the future right now is like fool's errand. We were just talking today about the new AI documentary that's coming out, right? And maybe it's out. Maybe this podcast will be out around the same time that it's coming out, right? And some of these ominous taglines around like, I don't know if I'm worried I should have kids, and people think we're going to be dead in 5 years or
Yep.
whatever,
Yep.
from the existential threat. So without going down that rabbit hole either, like, even projecting a handful of years into the future, 12 months, right? What are we gonna see? Are we gonna see more and more cases of AI-induced psychosis, right? Are we gonna see a real disruption in the therapy
Yeah.
space, right?
So, I think we should pick a time frame just to kind of like constrain the discussion because there's so many possibilities.
Sure.
I think that most, I'm gonna speculate here with some degree of background, but my sense is that most people that work in this space that aren't freaked out because of how scary it is, see all the things we named, like, I don't know, the confidentiality thing or the reality drift thing is just like, you know, specs for the next, feature set,
Right.
right? And so there's no reason in principle, as far as I'm concerned, that these things can't be improved upon. Okay. And this is why if you take a long time horizon, I feel like there's going to be very, very powerful, effective tools for mental health. Okay. But for the time being, where I am personally landing is that it's a high risk, high reward situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the risks can be very significantly mitigated by having a human in the loop, a therapist,
Yeah.
right? And so I think AI tools for psychotherapy should be, it's like the co-pilot thing. It should be something that um, that clients share with their therapist, that therapists get a chance, that have visibility on, that they get a chance to check out on, and it's just like um, an add-on to a relationship, a human to human live relationship. I think that's at this point probably the best chances of success of leveraging what's possible and minimizing what's
Right.
risky.
Again, the parallel to the psychedelic harm reduction and
Yeah.
integration approach to
Yeah.
psychedelic use, acknowledging some people are just going to be, flying by the seat of their pants with,
Yes.
chat GPT and psilocybin, like late into the night with no guardrails, and like maybe they'll be fine, and we'll come up with a new math. Let's not discount the the universe and its sense of humor in that way.
So, I want to actually, before we end this, which we have to
Yeah.
do soon, but I want to come
Yeah.
back to you. Like, I feel like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth here. I'd love to challenge you because on the
Who,
one
me?
hand, you share this, pretty cool story about Claude helping you through a difficult time in your life. And like I was there, right?
Uh-huh.
I saw how difficult it was, and I saw how helpful the
Am I
tool
through
was.
it?
I don't know.
We'll
That's a different
see.
conversation.
We'll see, right?
Yeah.
There's our favorite Zen parable there. We'll see.
So some openness and some, you're impressed, you're in awe of how powerful the technology is, and then you're like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to be too tech utopian here. Like, pick a team, man.
I don't pick teams. You know that about me, Jim. Time horizons.
Well, what's your takeaway? Like, where are you landing on all this?
I mean, like you, I think, I've also been fortunate to have you as a friend through this period.
I'm your human in the loop.
I got some humans in my corner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's important,
Yeah.
And some of the humans I happen to have in my corner happen to be like very good therapists as well.
Yeah.
Some of them are a little tight, but some of them are a little looser.
And what you needed depended on the context.
Well,
Sometimes
I have to, I think we have to emphasize that, right? That by all means, like, buy the ticket, like take the ride, it's like these, to borrow another sort of like psychedelic analogy. But yeah, have those human touch points and checkpoints. but I do think like if you are going to be using AI for just like more high stakes
Mhm.
problem solving in your life, right? Like look at applying some like this kind of frame, you know,
Yep.
to that work. And you sort of you highlighted it in the white paper. This like you're calling AI risk reduction, the air framework.
Yeah. We like to err on the side of caution.
There you go. Which maybe a bit cute, but it's I think people starting to think in that way
Yeah,
about this is really like bare minimum right now.
totally. And
Like go ahead.
and it is sort of the first thing on the priority list in harm reduction work is education, right? And making
Yeah.
sure people are fully informed. And to
Yeah.
the extent that anything that we're doing here pushes that agenda forward is just like a big win for
Yeah.
everybody. Yeah.
And that's true for the general public and for anyone who's listening who's a, mental health practitioner,
Yep.
wellness practitioner, especially, right? If you're doing this work, like again, be aware that your clients are probably doing this. If you're not losing clients already to the AI therapist, right? Which is a whole other potential conversation, right? But be aware that your clients are doing this, and like maybe get educated yourself, right? So that you
Yep.
can maybe this is a game changer for you and your clients, if you're using it safely, and if you're just again flying by the seat of your pants, like look out. So
Yep. Yep.
we do have on the at harmreduction.ai where the white paper is housed, there's a sign up form there too for folks who are interested in being part of the conversation we're just trying to continue to have just as practitioners around
Yep.
this very alive topic that's affecting everyone.
Yep. It's interesting. There's not a lot of supervisory resources or educational resources that I've seen uh, guiding therapists on how to respond to clients bringing in material that they've picked up in their conversations with their AIs. And
Well, it's not exactly it's kind of a moving target.
right, right. And again,
But
it
I mean,
has
maybe all the more reason, right? All the more reason to be
yep,
having those kinds of like live conversations rather than like you're not learning this from a textbook, that's for sure.
right. Yep. Yep.
Right? Don't print those anymore. Except the DSM.
Right. Right.
Still printing that. I think they're going to have to update it for the for all the AI induced stuff, right?
Wow. I'm sure that'll go well.
Yeah. All
Well,
right.
yeah, thanks for indulging me as I
That was fun.
deliver all that like really dense information. But yeah, really was really helpful to me to start to make sense of this stuff.
Yeah, and hopefully it'll be useful to other folks that are sort of navigating this territory. I mean, there's very few people in the world for whom this isn't, really fresh, new territory. So I know we're going to try and we'll continue to be talking about this on the podcast. Bring some other folks on to approach this topic from different perspectives and in line with all the other things we are exploring. Maybe more about the spiritual side of things, the attachment and intimacy side of
Mm.
things. Right? We didn't get into um, some of the implications with the chatbot companions that drift like that cross boundaries that a therapy bot would probably a decently trained therapy bot would not cross.
Right. Right.
I'll have to be explicit, not safe for work episode. All right, we'll leave it there.
All right. Thanks, Andrew. To be continued.